Oliver Twist. And Mrs. Corney has just made a cup of tea and is sitting down to drink it in her parlour. And she hears the ring at the front door of her little lodge. You have to imagine a big dress. Oh, dear me. Is that Mr. Bumble?
At your service, Lord.
Said Mr. Bumble, who was stopping outside to rub his shoes clean and to shake the snow from his coat, and who now made an appearance, bearing a cocked hat in one hand and a stick in the other.
Shall I shut the door, Mum?
The lady modestly hesitated to reply, lest there should be any impropriety in holding an interview with Mr. Bumble with closed doors. The gentleman, taking advantage of her hesitation and being very cold himself, shut it without permission. Mr. Bumble instantaneously turned his collar back again, laid his hat and stick upon a chair, and drew another chair up to the table. As he slowly seated himself, he looked at the lady. Mrs. Corney applied herself to the task of making his tea. Sweet, Mr. Bumble.
Very sweet indeed.
Mr. Bumble fixed his eyes on Mrs. Corney as he said this, and if ever a beadle looked tender, Mr. Bumble was that beadle at that moment.
Mrs. Corney, Mum, say this, Mom, that any cat or kitten that could live with you and not be fond of its own must be a asthma. It's no use disguising facts, Mom,
said Mr. Bumble, slowly flourishing his teaspoon with a kind of amorous dignity which made him doubly impressive.
I would drown it myself with pleasure.
Then you're a cruel man, and a very hard-hearted man besides.
Hard-hearted, Mom. Oh.
Mr. Bumble relinquished his cup without another word, squeezed Mrs. Corney's little finger as she took it, and inflicting 2 open-handed slabs upon his laced waistcoat, gave a mighty sigh, and hitched his chair a very little morsel far from the fire. It was a round table. Consequently, Mr. Bumble, moving his chair by little and little, soon began to diminish the distance between himself and the matron, and continuing to travel round the outer edge of the circle, brought his chair in time closer to that in which the matron was seated. Indeed, the 2 chairs touched. And when they did so, Mr. Bumble stopped. Now, if the matron had moved her chair a little to the left, she would have been scorched by the fire. And if to the right, she must have fallen into Mr. Bumble's arms. So, being a discreet matron, and no doubt foreseeing these consequences at a glance, she remained where she was. And handed Mr. Bumble another cup of tea.
Hard-hearted, Mrs. Corney. Are you hard-hearted? Mrs. Corney.
What a very curious question from a single man. Can you want to know for? Mr. Bumble drank his tea down to the last drop, finished a piece of toast, whisked the crumbs from his knees, wiped his lips, and deliberately kissed the matron. Oh, Mr. Bumble, I just screamed. I'm only a foolish, excitable, weak creature.
Not weak, Mom. Are you a weak creature, Mrs. Corney?
We're all weak creatures, Mr. Bumble.
So we are. So we are.
Nothing was said on either side for a moment or 2
This is a very comfortable room, Mom. Another room, and this, Mom, would be a complete thing.
Then it would be too much for one.
But not for two. Hey, Mrs. Corning. The ball allows you coals, don't they, Mrs. Corning?
And candles.
Coals